Hello chess friends and welcome to Jozarov Chess channel and welcome back to the FIDE Grand Swiss tournament in 2021. We're back now in the round 6, and in the round 6 we have seen what is, in my opinion, so far the best game in the tournament. And you know, whenever you watch maybe YouTube chess, many times you see, I don't know, the game of the day, the game of the week, the game of the month, even the game of the year, and many times it's a game played by Daniil Dubov. Because of his unique attacking style, because of his unique tactical style, many times the game of something is simply a Daniil Dubov game, and that's exactly what happened now. I think in the round 6 we had so far the game of the tournament, in which Daniil Dubov played really an outstanding and brutal tactical game. If I would only use one word in order to explain you this game, I would use the word dirty, because in this game Daniil Dubov prepared so many dirty tactical traps against my landsman Ivan Šarić, and Ivan Šarić so far played, I think, also a decent tournament, but today it was really a great tactical battle between Dubov and Šarić. So be prepared, put your seatbelts on. It was simply as I said, a dirty chess game. So let's check out now what happened. E4 here played by Daniil Dubov. We have c5 by Šarić, the Sicilian, knight to f3, d6, probably trying to go into the Najdorf. If of course d4 happens, then probably c takes d4, and with a6 white can face many times the Najdorf Sicilian. But here Daniil Dubov plays this Moscow variation, which is not allowing now black to go into Najdorf structures or in different structures. Basically white is choosing now the opening line, and after move bishop to b5, the main goal of whites is here that black plays simply the move bishop to d7. After move bishop to d7, white would be happy to trade off this light square bishop for this light square bishop, because many times you see in the continuation of the game, the light square bishop is a good piece. So after queen to d7 or knight to d7, black would actually continue the game with not such a good piece here, with this bad bishop on f8, which would be of course a little bit blocked out by its own pawn structure, by this pawn chain here on e7, d6 and c5. But okay, here after move bishop to b5, we have now this continuation. So here Šarić wants to stay with the light square bishops on the board, but this is not a good square for the knight. The knight is supposed to be on c6, but I think in this scenario many times you witness this one, bishop takes c6, and then we have here this move b takes c6, and black has already a messed up pawn structure. So that's why with the move knight to d7, of course you cannot get any more messed up pawn structure, but the knight should not be here now. It's standing in the way of the development of, again, the light square bishop. So it's slowing now a little bit the pace of black's game. It's slowing now down the development of black here. So that's why this is now the main idea here of the Moscow variation. So here castling played by Dubov, we have now a6 and now bishop to d3. Believe me or not, this is a common move in the Moscow variation, although it's on a natural move, and many times in this game you ask yourself the question, what is going on now in the game? Because when I was following the game, I was following most of the times the game between Širov and Firouzja from the round 6. I've analyzed also the game, you can also check it out, here's the link. And most of the times, as I said, I was following Firouzja Širov, but the other game that I followed was this one between Dubov and Šarić. And many times when I watched the current position, many times I just skipped to the position. I was wondering what is really going on, what the is going on here in the position, what's really happening, because many times some pieces are hanging, someone is down a piece. This was really brutal game. I really used the engine many times. I really don't like so much to use the engine, but in this game you have to really overload your stockfish, because it's simply such a game. So after move bishop to d3, maybe you're asking yourself what's going on, but actually with the move c3, bishop to c2, and now d4, white is preparing simply a central breakthrough. So in order to make that not happen here, knight to f6 first, challenging the pawn on e4, and after move c3, Šarić plays immediately the move b5. Expanding on the queen side, we have now a4 by Daniil Dubov, and here bishop to b7. We have a takes b5, a takes b5, and now rook to a8. We have queen to a8, and that was the first time I was asking myself the question, what's really going on? Because the pawn on e4 is such a weak pawn, but the problem is, I think, that black is also this weak pawn on b5. Bishop to b5 immediately is not so good, because after bishop to e4 also the knight is hanging, and there is now really a wild line in this particular sideline of the Moscow variation. There are many games in this types of ideas. The knight is a little bit out of game, and there is of course a threat to play bishop to f3, after queen to f3, then here queen to f3 and mess up further white pawn structure. But actually the main line, this wasn't played in the game, but I wanted to show you really how brutal this Moscow variation can be, is actually to sacrifice the knight with the move d4. And here after move bishop to b1, you have to play d takes c5. The problem is now here d takes c5 is simply not a good move, because you get this one, knight to e5, and now the knight will be taken. You can maybe temporarily protect it with bishop to f5, but now bishop to g5, you will lose simply the knight on d7. So you would be pretty much forced here after move bishop to e4, you would have to retreat, and then white can simply take c takes d6, and then the game continues. Of course, with a slight advantage for black, because black has an extra piece, but still black needs to really to defend this position. So it's a wild game. This is one of the lines that you can also face. So as I said, after move queen to e8, a8 here, the continuation after bishop to b5 is really wild. But Daniil Dubov played a different line. He plays now the move knight to a3. He wants now to recapture this pawn with the knight and stay with his protection on his e4 pawn. So that's why here b4 played by Šarić, a normal idea, kicking away first the knight. And after knight to b5, there is now of course the threat of the fork here on c7. So that's why here queen to a5 was played by Šarić, staying with his pressure around the square e4, but also protecting here the c7 weakness. And now the really wild stuff starts, because here in the continuation of the game, of course, c takes b4 played by Daniil Dubov, c takes b4 played by Šarić, and now bishop to c4. Maybe slightly better here is the move rook to e1, but this is not a Dubov style. He could have of course protected this pawn, then the game is really wild, because you cannot take bishop to e4. Bishop to e4 is not a possibility, although this bishop gets a little bit deflected from the defense of the knight, but that's not actually the point of this tactic. So here Daniil Dubov maybe even should have played the move rook to e1, but you see how this Moscow variation is really a tactical rich position. Here after move bishop to e4, you get this one, knight to g5, sacrificing the bishop. After here e6, you can of course take here the bishop on e4, but if you play bishop to d3, then you get this one, knight to d6. You cannot take, of course, you have to move the king, and then you get the fork on b7. This is really sick brutal tactical calculation already in an early stage of the game. So as I said, maybe rook to e1 would be a little bit better here for Daniil Dubov, but he tried even further to spice up the game, which is already a dynamic game. He played now the move bishop to c4. Here in the continuation, finally, here Šarić takes, knight to e4 takes now this centralized pawn, and here d3, kicking away the knight. But Šarić plays now great move, a counter attack, which is actually even the suggested move by the top engine Stockfish that I use for analysis. d5, perfect move, counter attack. We want to take out the bishop. The bishop is of course protecting the knight. We want to simply grab two pieces for one piece that we're losing, although we have to notice black's king is a little bit endangered. You still need like e6, bishop to e7, and maybe castling, so you at least need 3 tempi in order to secure the king. Meanwhile, of course, white is doing something, and you know, when you're staying with the king in the center against Daniil Dubov, then many tactical problems can happen. So as I said, it's a compensation here, activity against simply pure chess material. So after move d5, Daniil Dubov again plays a counter attack. It's not allowing here so far Šarić to breathe, because knight to c7 is also now the tactical idea. So that's why e5. What Šarić is hoping for, that like Dubov did here to take out with the knight, that there is now not anymore the connection here between the bishop and the knight. So knight to c7 is so far not a possibility. And this move knight to e5 gives here Šarić time to finally take out the bishop, and now also the knight is hanging. So here after move d takes c4, d takes c4 was played by Dubov, and this was now his first mistake. Okay, there are maybe tiny inaccuracies, but I think all of these inaccuracies that your engine maybe will show also at home in your analysis were part of Daniil Dubov's calculation. He wanted to get this complicated position, but now d takes c4 is actually a huge mistake here by Daniil Dubov. A better continuation is the move queen to h5. Queen to h5 is really a brutal move, because we're threatening, of course, first of all, this annoying check on f7, which would probably lead even to a checkmate. You have to play g6, but now you get simply knight to c4. You get a counter attack here against the queen, and the only way to defend further is probably to play even the move g takes h5, and then knight to h5 would probably lead into a drawish line. There is maybe a different idea here for black to protect the position with queen to a4, staying very active. Now white needs to move the queen, but again white can play a further attack with the move here b3, and if you try queen takes b3, then you get this one, queen to e1, and finally the knight is not hanging anymore. Actually you're the one that will lose, that will lose now a further piece in the continuation. So in order to here, instead of this queen to b3, finally g takes h5 would lead now into such a complicated game. So as I said, this is something that Dubov should have played. This move d takes c4 wasn't the best of calculations by Dubov, we have to say it, because here after g takes h5, white can also take b takes a4, and now in order to get your piece back, you have to step back with your knight here to c5, but now the fun starts actually for white. After move rook to e1, you cannot play here bishop, king to d8 because you get checkmated. Bishop to c7, then you have to move the king, and then rook to e8 would lead into checkmate. So you would be forced to play a different continuation. You would be forced to cover yourself with the move knight to e6, but finally with the move knight to d6 finally, and bishop to d6, knight takes d6. Now the knight is not on c5 anymore, and we can now get our piece back, and after move king to f8, bishop to h6, king to e7, and knight to b7. This should probably a drawish position, although the pawn structure of blacks is not so good, but finally activating the rook is now an option. For instance, at least my engine at home is showing here 0.0 evaluation. So this is something that Dubov should have done. I'm not sure if he saw this, if this was part of his tactical calculation, but he played simply the move d takes c4, and it gives now Šarić a comfortable game because he finally took, because the knight was also hanging here on d7. So after bishop to e5, now Šarić makes a mistake. He plays now the move bishop to c5. And okay, let's flip the board a little bit in order to show you how dangerous chess can be. I think 99% of any player would play the move simply bishop to c5, because it seems so. Bishop to c5 attacks the f2, and we can now in the next move castle, and it's a perfect position. But actually the great move that Šarić unfortunately missed was a better idea, was the move f6. f6 would at least temporarily kick away the bishop, and if you try something like rook to e1, the problem is now you cannot play f takes e5. That rook to e1 would be a necessary move here for Dubov in order to prolong the game. As I said, black is much better in this position because Dubov missed his tactic with the move rook to e1. Now if black takes f takes e5, now you get this one, queen to h5, you have to move the king, then queen to e5, and again the engine shows perpetual check possibilities for white, and the game would probably end in a draw. There is this line, bishop to c5, then queen to g7, and the problem is now you cannot cover yourself here with the move rook to e8, then you get this one, rook to d1, and the game is over. But actually here, of course, queen to d7, and you lose the rook. Actually, you should cover yourself here with the move rook to f8, and now everything is glued together, so there's no way that white will take out your queen. So white has only here perpetuals, and the game would probably end in a draw. But in order to make that happen, instead of this idea, instead of taking after move f6 and here rook to e1, there is now a great move that black can play. It's the move h5. But these are so dirty really tactics. As I said, with the move h5 we're preventing now this move queen to h5. This move is not going to happen in the continuation of the game, and here my engine at home gives already a +2 evaluation for black. So this was the only way for Ivan Šarić to defend his position so far, or at least to get a better position, because actually it's Dubov that has to get back into the game because he is down a piece. He has sacrificed something now. Here, as I said, in the continuation, Šarić played now the move bishop to c5 with ideas to play here knight to f7, knight to f2. Here in the continuation we have bishop to d6, because again Dubov plays really sick, brutal moves. This is really wild what Dubov is doing. In the beginning it seems so that it's a normal move, this idea bishop to d6, but actually when you see there was maybe even this opportunity to play queen to g4. Again, this move would also prevent here Ivan Šarić from castling, but probably Dubov was scared because of this tactic, knight to f2 with this discovered attack. The problem is now again you cannot take rook to f2, you get queen to a1, you get a checkmate, so you can maybe cover with the queen, but still queen to d1 will happen. You cannot cover with the rook because of this bishop's activity. The only way to prolong the game is queen to g7, but now knight to h3, and again we're doing simply perpetuals. As I said, rook to f2 is not a possibility, so knight to h3, knight to f2, and the game would probably lead into a draw. And Dubov is Dubov, you know, although the engine gives here also, after move bishop to d6, equal chances for both sides. This is a move which causes now many problems for Ivan Šarić. This is a move that makes Ivan Šarić first sweat, because if Dubov would have played the move queen to g4, as I said, probably the game would lead into a draw. But here the engine still gives 0.0 evaluation, but it's a different position in which black has to still prove the draw. That's a huge difference. You have to make work for a draw here. So after move bishop to d6, we have bishop to d6, knight to d6, knight takes d6, and now queen to d6. The problem is now that the king is cut off. The king cannot castle anymore, and rook to e1 will happen. There is now huge position problem. So that's why Šarić played now the correct move, bishop to c8 after rook to e1, bishop to e6, covering so far with the bishop. We have rook to d1, and now queen to a8. Still Šarić is now protecting the position very well. We have c5 here by Dubov, and now queen to c8. We have c6, and now h5. This was a good move here by Ivan Šarić. He wants, of course, to include the rook into the defense, and then try maybe something like f6, king to f7, and maybe get sort of a path and escape finally with the king into security. But here the Dubov played, of course, rook to e1. He's threatening some ideas maybe of f4, f5 is also a nice idea. Then of course you couldn't take because of this activity by the rook on the e file. So here rook to h6, and here rook to e5. This is now again not the best of moves here by Dubov. Here h4 would be the possibility, and the problem is now after f5 we can play simply the move c7, and again the game would probably end in a draw, because here black cannot escape anymore from this idea. Black cannot play with the queen. Then you get simply here queen to d8, or here rook to e6. You cannot also escape with the rook. The problem is you will again lose your bishop. You cannot also escape with the king, because you will probably get this idea queen to d8, where in the next couple of moves you are vulnerable to some promotion ideas. So in this particular position, again, the game would probably lead into a draw, because all of these pieces by black are paralyzed, although black is up a whole piece, but still this should probably end in a draw. But here after move rook to e5, Šarić played still a good move, queen to d8, tries to here they'll release the pressure, but actually a better move is simply to play b3. b3 is at least staying with this extra pawn on the queen side on the board. This is now very important to stay with the b pawn on the board, not to lose it, because if you lose this pawn, then suddenly white can also connect two pass pawns on the queen side. That's a huge difference to have this position and the position that they reach now, because after queen to d8 we have now queen takes b4, and you see all of these pieces again are paralyzed. Queen to d1 is not working because you get rook to e1. Still you can cover of course with the rook. So that's why after queen to b4 it's not so again easy to play here for black the position. Really wild stuff. After move queen to c7 was played, queen to c5, king to queen to e7. Of course Dubov doesn't want to trade off the queens. He wants to stay active here with these two pawns on the queen side. Here in the continuation we have queen to c7, and now finally b4. We have king to e7, now b5, rook to h8, and now queen to g3. Here Dubov is preparing, of course, a very dirty tactic again, rook to g6, with ideas to take the queen on c7. So that's why you have now several options here. Rook to d8, so far a good move here by Ivan Šarić, and now after move h4, which creates of course breathing spaces for the king. Now after rook to d1 we can escape with our king. Here Ivan Šarić plays now a huge mistake. The best move is actually to play rook to d1, then after king to h2 we can still play king to d8, and you see now we're glued together. Still probably this game would end in a draw after a couple of perpetuals by white, and at least you have protected your queen. Now this tactic is not working, of course, rook to e6, because your queen is protected by the king. But here in the continuation, after move king to f8 was played, which was now huge blunder by Ivan Šarić. Maybe you can pause the video now and try to see now the best continuation here for white. It's again really a dirty tactic. As I said, it was simply a dirty chess game here by Daniil Dubov. Here after move king to f8, it's a winning tactic here for white. Okay, we have talked about this move before, so the move is rook to e6. Discovered attack. The problem is now, after queen to g3 that Daniil Dubov faced here, Ivan Šarić played this move, queen takes g3, we have f takes g3, but now after move f takes e6, the problem is now this move, c7, is actually winning the game immediately, because we have now two connected pawns that are already on the 6th rank, and there's nothing that can be done. The king is simply too far away from the action. So the move king to f8 was a huge blunder by Ivan Šarić. The king is simply out of the range of this pawns, and the king cannot defend this position anymore. We have king to e7. Even if you try, of course, something like this, will play simply b6, you get closer with your king, but now b7, you can take out this one, but we can also promote. If you don't react, if you play something else, then again b8 or c8 are simple promotions, and you get a new queen. After the rook takes, we can simply take and promote to another queen. So really wild stuff what happens. So after move c7, we have king to e7. The problem is now we have c takes d8, king takes d8, but now we have the so-called distant pass pawn in an endgame. Now the king is simply deflected too far away from the action. The king has to battle with this distant pass pawn, and meanwhile white is doing something. White will simply get all of these pawns here on the king side. That's actually what happened. King to f2, we have king to c7, king to e3, king to b6, king to d4, and now we have this move, and in this position Ivan Šarić resigned. In the next couple of moves here, Daniil Dubov will simply take out this one and also this one, and it's simply game over. So really brilliant game. We have to say it, many inaccuracies, mistakes, you can call it what you like, but it was, I think, really beautiful and brutal game. This is something that we want to see sometimes in chess, really dirty, brutal tactics without thinking so much. You just go straight forward into the attack, and this was almost like watching Mikhail Tal at his peak. So I hope that you enjoyed this game. I really enjoyed it a lot. This was simply a brilliant Daniil Dubov style chess game that we love to see. If you want to see more attacking brilliances like this, check out my best chess games of all time series with some great games from the past. And if you want to see also some computer chess games which are even dirtier than this, check out my commented chess games played by computers with some brilliant games played by Stockfish, Alpha Zero, Lila Zero, and many more. And if you like this content, don't forget to subscribe to my channel. See you soon with some more videos, and chess is the best, of course.